Well, this is Down to the River radio show, straight out of PA, nestled on the banks of the North Saskatchewan River, the snow-flecked banks of the North Saskatchewan River. I'm not sure if flecked is a word. I just pulled that right out of my rear. But on the line with me is Saskatoon country music recording sensation Zachary Lucky. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing great, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, now we've been trying to make this happen for a while because, of course, you were in PA at, hopefully what is about to become the famed House of Joel and Kiana, to do a little house concert, and I never actually found out how that went.
Yeah, it was an intimate night. I don't know if you've been to their house, but it was a very small house. When you do these house concerts, sometimes the houses and the spaces are larger, and sometimes they're smaller. And their home was particularly intimate, we would say. And
Yeah,
but it was good. We had a whole crew of people. I don't think we could have fit more people in the living room. And
right.
it was a pretty good way to fill a Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever it was. And always nice to be back up in Prince Albert as well.
Yeah,
So
I think you were supposed to play the Keyhole Castle, but the gig fell through, and Joel and Kiana's place was sort of like a last minute, last ditch effort replacement to at least get you some FaceTime with the good people of PA, if my memory serves me correct.
yeah, that's about right. Yeah, there were some unfortunate circumstances, beyond the venue's control, and
Yeah,
there was a loss in the family, which was you can never predict that stuff, obviously.
yeah,
And we when we're traveling and touring around, we don't like taking days off, so it was very kind of them to open up their home and do the house concert till last minute.
yeah, yeah. Well, now I was trying to think of, I have been to their house. It is, as you mentioned, very, very intimate. Now, I haven't seen their house when there wasn't chaos around, because the last time I was over there was when they were getting ready for Chesterfest, and they had hand
Yeah.
painted signs and things all over the place. So, I was trying to imagine how that space was going to work out for you, especially considering the fact that it's not that things don't happen in PA, but things would happen maybe, less to the point that somebody like Zachary Lucky coming into the town would maybe be a bit of an event.
Yeah, no, we made good use of the space, being an acoustic, basically in bluegrass form,
Yeah,
just three instruments. We don't take up too much space, and
right.
yeah, I think they tidied the place up for us, and
That's good.
it was a real wonderful show.
Now, do you do a lot of house concerts? Because I think, from my understanding of talking to other artists that have been through here, there's a bit of a circuit and an organization that you can connect with to do these types of things. Am I right?
Yeah, I've been doing house concerts for basically the entirety of my career, which is just over 10 years now, I
Right.
suppose. And I'm not quite sure when it was they kind of picked up in popularity, but with a lot of these rural communities across Canada, especially, and it's begun to spread as well. But with a lot of these smaller towns and communities, there's a need and a want and a desire for uh, live music and art and things to do. And people in those places want to hear music just as bad as people in Toronto or Montreal, but a lot of the time there just aren't the venues to present the music. So it's a pretty easy thing to say, hey, I got a house and 25 friends who would like to hear you play, and that's basically what it's come down to. Is I put it out there a couple times a year. I say, hey, if there's anybody out there who wants to see this music and you want to have a house concert and you got 25, 30 friends who want to see it too, then we're game. We'll make it happen.
Right.
It's easy as that. It's a way to hear this music in intimate spaces, and house concerts are always different than if you were to see the show in a loud bar or a bigger theater.
Yeah.
Just getting up close with the artist and getting to talk with everybody and have a couple beers with everybody. Like it's a real special thing as an artist and as a listener too. I've taken in some of my favorite artists in the house concert setting, and it's a particularly wonderful thing. So,
Yeah, for sure.
as a songwriter artist, I love doing it. It's easy. You show up, you usually get to eat supper with people, and and then you get to get up there and sing, which is what I like doing. And I particularly like singing in living rooms and kitchens and places like that. Uh, a lot of the songs I write are written in my home here in Orillia, Ontario, and so it's always great to get to
Yeah.
bring these songs into other people's homes as well.
Now, I think you've been in Ontario for about 5 years. So, I mean, how special is it to come back to Saskatchewan when you get the opportunity?
It's always good, man. I'm always looking for a reason to get back to Saskatchewan. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think and dream and pine for. I have a hard time deciphering what it is about Saskatchewan that I'm just always longing for.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it's the winds or the. Well, I definitely miss the sunset and the sky. It's not quite the same out here in Ontario.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I say, I'm always missing home, and whether it be my family's land down around Yorkton, or my family up in Saskatoon, just always trying to get back there. And sadly, it's usually only a couple times a year, but make it work when we can.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now, of course, when you did that show back in November, your album Midwestern had dropped just in October. So, I mean, now that the record has had a chance to, settle a little bit, I mean, have you found the reactions to the record? Because I do know there was a bit of a different approach here, right? I mean, you decided to do a little bit more live off the floor and a little bit more acoustic. So it's got that kind of small budget, but as you mentioned, almost like bluegrass kind of feel because you're sort of in a trio or quartet format most of the time.
Yeah, I've always been drawn to that kind of music where it's a person and a guitar and lyrics and stories, right from when I started doing this. And I mean, that's kind of what I was doing at the beginning there, but the past record, Everywhere a Man Can Be,
right.
We did that at a studio down in Toronto. And, I mean, I like the way the record turned out. I think it's cool. And I like those songs a lot. I still play a lot of those songs.
Sure.
And I think each of them have a special sound to them. But by the time we got done with the thing, there was like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 instruments on every song, and you don't really hear it when you're listening to it. But for us to actually go out and play those songs like that on the road, it's thousands of dollars a day, and you're just burning money doing that. So I don't know. I wanted to revisit the idea of doing something a little more almost solo-esque. And although this record did not turn out to be a solo record, we did kind of pare it down a bit. The original sessions were myself and a fiddle player, John Showman,
right,
who's in a bunch of great Canadian bands. Ivan Rosenberg, who's a world-renowned dobro player, had my upright bassist, Mitch Thompson, and that was it for the original sessions. The one day we did have our friend Will Fisher come and play drums on a handful of the tracks too. And then we tacked on some pedal steel afterwards. So, it did get a little bigger than I thought it was going to get, but sonically.
Yeah.
But it still, I think, retained a bit of that stripped down feel. At least I hope it did. I think there's sort of a renaissance of that kind of music happening right now. You look at people like my buddy Colter Wall, or great songwriter down in Texas, Adam Carroll.
Right.
There's a bunch of folks who are writing this music, making this music, and it's stripped down, and I don't know. Like I said, it's the kind of music I've always been drawn to.
Yeah.
I have a real itch to make an actual solo record where it's just me and a guitar. I don't know if people would actually want to listen to that for 35, 40 minutes straight, but I think it'll probably happen at some point or another. But anyways, Midwestern's been doing pretty good. It's always interesting to see what happens when you put a record out. You write, you sit at home, you write these songs, and then you release them off into the world like children, and exactly, they go and have their own lives. They kind of take on a life of their own, and it's an interesting thing, man. It's people are listening to it. And sold a bunch of copies so far, which is always nice. And you always want to see see it do more, you're like you're lazy teenager. It's just like, oh, just get yourself together and do a little bit more. But there's a little bit of growth with every record,
Yeah.
and it's not done yet. So I'm excited to see where it'll take me next.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you were talking about that stripped down sound because, the first name that popped into my head, not a word of a lie, while you were talking about that was like, oh, Coulter Wall. And then you just
Yeah.
seconds later you mentioned Coulter Wall. So, that's pretty cool. We're synchronous here today, Zachary. I mean, there
Yeah.
you
Right
go.
on. There you go.
Well,
Yeah.
now here's a curious kind of aside that I had too is, you chose to go to a studio in Hamilton, which I found interesting considering the fact that they seem to be developing a little bit more, rock and roll street cred these days with the, rise of Monster Truck and maybe to a lesser extent Tara Lightfoot. I mean, what was it with, Catherine North Studios that, maybe you felt would work for yourself instead of trucking everything down to Nashville like so many artists seem to be doing these days?
Yeah, the Nashville thing, that's a totally different thing than I've ever done, or probably ever will. I mean, I'm not going to rule it out, but I've always thought of myself first and foremost as a Saskatchewan artist. Secondly, as a Canadian artist. I think a lot of the songs I write are, it's CanCon. It's songs from Canada, about Canadian people, Canadian stories and experiences. So, I mean, making records in Nashville is cool. I don't think I'll ever have the money to do that. If there's a record label out there who wants me to make a record down in Nashville, call me.
Yeah.
Scott will give you my phone number. But, I've always been drawn to making records in Canada, whether that be Saskatchewan or out here in Ontario. With this record specifically, and with most records, it's always situational. With my early records, it was like, okay, what do we have? How can we make a record? Where are we? Oh, there's a coffee shop. Oh, there's an attic. Oh, we got some microphones. Let's go up into the attic of this coffee shop in Yorkton and we'll make a record.
Yeah.
Or, oh, so-and-so's got a house out in Manitoba. Let's go record there for a while. In this case, it was merely a connection with Dan Hosch, who is one of the owners at Catherine North. He had been a fan for a while, and we were kind of on the hunt for somewhere and some way to make a record. And Dan sent me a message that said, hey, you should probably give me a call and let's figure this out. And so we went down there and had a visit, and it was just a gorgeous space. It's an old converted church that they've turned into this recording studio. And so it's just a big open room,
Yeah.
and beautiful kind of echo in there, and some beautiful old microphones and positive vibes. And, it's close enough to Toronto where most of my band was located at the time. And it just made sense to do it there, Like I say, it's situational, time and place. And I think it worked out pretty good. I think the record got a real particular sound to it. When you go into making a record, you go into it with sort of this notion of what it's going to sound like after you're done. And I remember the first time I heard the first mixes, and I was like, oh, this sounds very different than what I was expecting it to sound like. But a lot of the recordings that I enjoy are, records that have very particular sounds. Like if you listen to people like Fred Eaglesmith, those records are, they don't just sound like your run-of-the-mill records. There's a real different sonic quality to them. And I think it's good to be different. I think it's good for it to sound a little dusty. And I've never really been drawn to that commercial sound. At some point in time, I might want to make a commercial sounding country record, but I think we did what we needed to do down there at Catherine North, and turned out just the way it should have. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, it looks like it's a 1,500 square foot kind of open concept room in an old, century-old converted church. And, I'm just on the website here, and, Elliot Brood has recorded there. Whitehorse, Walk Off the Earth. Royal Wood. I mean, these aren't necessarily artists that are in your ballpark, but there's certainly artists that would, benefit from a more live and organic kind of open concept feel. And I would imagine that's kind of, what you were looking for in this record, given the, live off the floor feel that it has.
Definitely.
Well, now listen, let's talk about a couple of these tracks now. You talked about artists that you've kind of enjoyed and maybe that have influenced you a little bit, but I'll have to say the track that really did it for me, that I felt really set you apart, was Raining in December, which I felt almost had this kind of vibrant, earthy Gordon Lightfoot kind of charm to it. I mean, is Gordon Lightfoot somebody that you've grown up worshiping in the temple of?
Honestly, Scott, I haven't spent a ton of time listening to Gordon Lightfoot. Somebody told me about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that I had a bit of a Gordon Lightfoot thing, and so I told myself I should probably listen to some Gordon Lightfoot, and because I honestly hadn't before then, and turns out he's pretty good. He's all right, and if he keeps it up, he might have a decent career. Funny enough, it's kind of serendipitous. I actually, where I'm calling you from now, my home in Aurelia,
right,
is only about a block and a half from the house that Gordon Lightfoot grew up in. So,
oh, wow,
kind of serendipitous and funny that way.
yeah.
But yeah, Raining in December was I co-wrote that with my friend from Manitoba, Richard Inman. It was the first song that I'd ever co-written over email, and
wow.
it was kind of started out being a song about my distaste for the Ontario winters. Everybody always complains about how cold it is in Saskatchewan, but man, let me tell you, shoveling like wet, heavy snow when it's snowing and it's 1 degree is horrible. So that's what we were doing today, and kind of makes me long for the cold winters of the prairies.
Yeah.
So the song started out being about that, in a way, ended up being about a whole bunch more, and we probably could have run away with it and put a bunch of pedal steel and drums and everything on that song, but I'm pretty glad that we kept it stripped down and atmospheric. I think it allowed the lyrical content to come through a little bit more, and yeah, for some reason I never took that as a song that people would really get into, but when people listen to the record, I do get quite a few comments on that one. So I'm glad you like that one. One of my favorites too.
That's good. Yeah. Well, now you mentioned co-writing via email. I think, what are some of the challenges in general that you have in co-writing, and then what are some of the unique challenges of doing it, digitally, so to speak?
Honestly, this is the first record where I've done any co-writing. It started off, I did a song with my other Manitoba songwriter pal, Del Barber, who you might know.
Yeah, of course.
From up in Inglis, Manitoba there. He's great songwriter. We did a track, that's probably the first one, and then me and Richard ended up doing a couple as well. Like I say, one over email there, and one we actually happened to cross paths in Regina, Saskatchewan. And we managed to squeak out a song there. Yeah, co-writing is a funny thing, because when you're writing a song, obviously you got an idea, and when you put another mind to it, all of a sudden there's a whole other angle, and they're seeing a different side and different tones and textures and ideas than you might have, so in a way, I think it's actually, there's a reason that so many people are doing it, because it's like it's like when you're squeezing a lime. If you're just squeezing it a little bit, you're only going to get a little bit of juice. But if you squeeze it hard, you get one of those lime squeezers and you get all the juice out of it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing. If you're just writing a song by yourself, you're really getting just a part of it, which is, I mean, it's great, but you toss another head in there and you end up getting a little bit more than you would have maybe come up with on your own. And everybody's different. I got friends who are just incredible artists, and they can write a total masterpiece on their own. And so can I, but it's all, like I say, it's all situational, time and place, and every song has a different course that it has to walk.
Right.
Yeah, the whole email thing, that song was total fluke. I came up with the first verse of that song sitting on the couch here, and I just, as a joke, sent it off to Richard, and 10 or 15 minutes later, he wrote back with a verse, and I tried singing it, and it fit just right, and so I started playing both the verses and came up with a third and sent it back to him, and within an hour there, we had ourselves a song. It was not intentional, bit of a fluke, but I reckon it worked out okay.
Indeed, indeed. Well, now, you've been living, I think, in Ontario for what, maybe 5 years?
Yeah, about 5.5 years, 5.5 years, something like that.
Yeah, and now you've managed to, you've got, you've started a little family and you're kind of staying a little bit closer to home. So, I mean, I couldn't help but notice now you've got, a song on here. It's actually the first track on Midwestern, as a matter of fact, called "There Was a Time When I Used to Run." So I would imagine this is kind of, autobiographical for you, right? I mean, this is kind of your life.
That tune is definitely an autobiographical song. I drop a few little tidbits in there. It's always interesting when people listen to your music, and you really get to see who's listening and how close they're listening. I talk about the Blackfoot Diner in Calgary, Alberta, which is a great establishment. If you've never been, you should go to the truck stop there and on Blackfoot Drive. It's great. And in that song, I talk about how I used to wrestle with this idea that I thought I was going to die. In my early years of touring, I always had this notion that I was going to die. Not necessarily a sour or negative notion. It just was something that just sort of felt, like it was out of my control. Not to put myself on a pedestal next to, Kurt Cobain or whoever, or any of those musicians who died young, but there's just, you look at all the artists that we've lost at such a young age, and the amount. I was on the road at the time, and we were out doing 200 shows a year, and more often than not driving on, horrible roads, or driving 10 hours trying to get to a gig through a blizzard, and you can't help but think, oh man, one of these days, I think this highway is going to get the better of me. And that was a notion that I carried around for a long time. And it's only recently where it sort of slipped away. I guess having kids chases stuff like that out of your head, and you kind of realize you can't up and die like that. But that song definitely was a bit of a closing of a chapter, and talking about the past and looking forward. I don't know if I spoke well about it or not, but it also features some the dying art of country music talking, which I think there's not enough people just talking in country music anymore. But
that's right. Yeah, well,
ode to that.
There's so many great Johnny Cash songs, and also to, I don't want to say to a lesser extent, but to a similar extent, Stompin' Tom songs out there as well, where there's, I mean, there's so much information and storytelling that you can convey sometimes when you do that, quote unquote, talking blues type thing, like, the great Johnny Cash used to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a lost art. Not enough young country singers are doing it, so I figured I might as well do a bit of it.
Yeah. Well, now you come from quite the, country music pedigree, right? Because, I mean, you're the grandson of the great smiling Johnny Lucky, who, from what I understand, used to tour around the Arctic communities. I mean, have you ever gone up north of 60? I would imagine at least once you have.
I've been up to Dawson City for a great festival up there,
right,
called the Dawson City Music Festival.
Yep.
It's a fabulous event. So I've been up there once, which is not enough. Hopefully, in the next few years, we'll make our way back up there a little more. I really like to get up to Yellowknife. I've heard great things about that place.
Yeah.
So I, like you say, my grandfather was a Western singer from Roxton, Saskatchewan, down by Yorkton, around there, and spent the majority of his life touring, to coast. And along the way, he ended up spending a lot of time in the north of Canada, in the Arctic and the Yukon Northwest Territories and northern Quebec.
Yeah.
And he had a pretty interesting career. You know, he's one of those guys. He was very, you know, like pre-punk, do-it-yourself kind of guy, anti-union. You know, very very pro Canadian music industry. You know, at the time there was everybody was singing American country songs, and he was very, you know, pro Canada and telling the Canadian story as well. Yeah, it was a very kind of hard working career. He never really had a big break, but he worked hard and toured his whole life, you know, basically till the year he died back in 2010. And, you know, I didn't get to know him as much as I would have liked. We spent a decent amount of time together and never got the chance to play any shows together, but kind of, you know, make use of the time you have, I guess. And maybe that's where I get some of this from. But I remember when he was in the hospital right at the end of his life, and he couldn't really talk too well, but he sort of leaned over, and I could tell he said, "Do something else." And I said, you know, I can't. Like, it's in us. When this sort of stuff, when you're doing it, it's part of you. It's in your blood, and so you can't just turn away and do something else. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting career. You know, he had some really great records. He was largely an entertainer, but he definitely wrote some really great songs. At some point in time, when I find some spare time, I have a dream of reissuing some of his music and piecing together a bit of a documentary to tell his story.
Yeah.
But if you're interested out there, if you're listening in Radioland and you want to find out more about Smilin' Johnny Lucky, he did write a book, and it can be tough to find. But if you go over to eBay and you type in 8 Miles North, Smilin' Johnny, I'm sure you'll find a copy of that book on there. And it's a lot of Canadian music history in that book, and wow. Pretty interesting guy. Pretty interesting legacy. So
yeah. Well, now speaking, you know, from my own perspective, I lived in Yellowknife for 13 years, and I mean, the North it's just a place all its own. I'd stop short of calling it the Wild West, but I mean, it might be one of the last quote unquote entirely autonomous parts of Canada that are out there in terms of the culture and the people and the accessibility and so on and so forth, especially the higher up towards the Arctic Circle that you get.
Yeah, I mean, also you got to keep in mind, I mean, they were touring up there, I want to say late 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
You know, quite a long time ago, and a lot of those communities have gone through lots of changes, and probably not exactly how things used to be. Maybe some of them probably are still, but hard to say.
Yeah. Well, internet accessibility has you know, morphed the culture maybe in directions where, you know, what they had was maybe a little bit more pure, but now you've got, you know, the hip hop influences and things like that are making their way up there, and you know, the pop and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the time, I think a big thing at the time is that there just wasn't a lot of entertainment up there, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
And to have somebody travel, you know, hours and hours and hours, multiple flights to get to your small community, you know, way up north in Canada to come and sing songs, it probably would have been a pretty spectacular thing. I run a Facebook page for him.
Yeah.
And, you know, probably once a month, maybe once every couple months, I'll get a message from somebody, usually in the North, saying, "Hey, I saw Smilin' Johnny Lucky when I was a kid, and I remember it being, you know, just this incredible experience and something totally different, and a memory that they hold dear." You know, it's really interesting to hear how music like that can leave such a lasting impact.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
now I know it's a small world, and it certainly is a small province, Saskatchewan. I mean, population wise. So I don't know if you've ever run into Jeffrey Straker at all.
yeah, I know Jeff. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
He was recently up in Resolute Bay working with people in a songwriting clinic of all things. I don't
Wow.
know if
Yeah.
if that dropped on your social media radar, but I mean, do you think that is something that you'd want to do in the future, maybe just to get up there and see the Arctic and maybe work with some of the good people?
Yeah, no, I've done a bit of that. I've done a couple songwriting workshops. Actually, I did one up when I was in Dawson City, and it's always a great thing. It's a pretty weird thing talking about songwriting. It's kind of like talking about the wind. You can't see it, but you can feel it. But I'm willing to do basically anything once, and I definitely love traveling and getting around, and the North for me. I mean, we were just, like I say, we just been up there the one time, but it's
Yeah.
it's sort of like a fish hook stuck in me, and I can feel the pull.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm very thankful that got passed on to me from my grandfather is, in his time in the North, he was able to he brought back some really wonderful artwork from the North,
Sure.
and it hangs in the walls in my house here, and I look at those paintings every single day and dream of getting up to those places. So who knows? It's hard to say. Things are kind of slow right now. I'm trying to make sure I'm around home the right amount of time with my kids. You only
Yeah.
get to do this once, um, and I don't plan on being one of those folks who is just who puts their work before their kids. So it makes it kind of tough to get his way as much as I'd like to, but yeah, the North is definitely on the list, and we'll be getting up there soon enough, I'm sure. So
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned Yellowknife because, of course, they have that great festival up there, Folk on the Rocks. That
I know.
I'm sure there would be room on the bill for somebody like Zachary Lucky to get up there at least at one time.
You also get on Twitter and tweet at Folk on the Rocks and say, "Book Zachary Lucky." And yeah, I've been dreaming about playing that one for a while, and we've talked about it. One of these years we'll get to check that one off.
So, where's the best place to pick up Midwestern and also some of that sweet Zachary Lucky swag, like that awesome trucker hat that you posted on your
Oh,
page
right
the
on.
other day?
It's a nice hat. I have one that I wear around. Yeah, you head over to ZacharyLucky.com and you check out the trucker hats, T-shirts, posters, and vinyl records and CDs, whatever you're into.
Right.
Or if you're not into those things, you want to start, take it slow. Just head over to your Spotify or your Apple Music or whatever you use, and click follow over there. That helps out too, and you get to check out all the records. And once you decide you like them enough to buy one, then head over to the online store.
Right on, Zachary. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but it's been great chatting with you, and like I said, great talking to somebody from the 306. It's always good to connect with the phenomenal Saskatchewan talent that we have since moving here a little over a year ago. I've got to know quite a number of fantastic artists, of which I would obviously include you in that great list. So, like I said, thanks again for your time, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Right on. Well, you have a good night, eh?
Take it easy.
Okay, bye-bye.